Welcome to the Leap Day version of the smartest people in the room. We are glad you are here, and just by showing up, you're already demonstrating your very own smarts. Today, I am thrilled to present two guys who are literally the smartest people in any room they enter, this one included. I promise you'll leave smarter and more enlightened than you arrived. Before we get started, please let me take care of some logistics. First, the reason we do these webinars is twofold. First, we want to showcase really smart people and the amazing work they do day to day in the music industry. But the second reason is a bit more nuanced. Many of you know that I'm a music industry headhunter. I run the music practice at Turnkey ZRG, and I place music executives in roles throughout the industry. So by definition and function, I help people connect with companies. In this series, my goal is to help you make more connections, and I invite you to take full advantage of that opportunity. Specifically, I invite you to engage with the speakers and the other attendees in the chat of the Zoom. Please introduce yourselves, share your LinkedIn profile, say hello to your friends, and make some new ones. And ask questions of our speakers. We will try to address as many of those as possible during the session. Also, please make sure your chat is set to address everyone, not just the host and speakers. I want to thank our program sponsors, for without their support, we could not do this for free. Special thank you to First Horizon Bank, Turnkey ZRG, the Tennessee Entertainment Commission, MedJet, Tennessee Brew Works, Project Music, and Better Than Booze. Well, let's get down to business. In today's host seat, we welcome one of my heroes, Dean Budnick. Dean is the co-author of concert promoter Peter Shapiro's book, The Music Never Stops, What Putting on 10,000 Shows Has Taught Me About Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Magic. He previously worked with John Popper on the memoir, Suck and Blow, and other stories I'm not supposed to tell. His 5 other books include Ticketmasters, The Rise of the Concert Industry and How the Public Got Scalped. He's also reported on live entertainment for Billboard, Variety, and Hollywood Reporter. Dean, who is editor-in-chief of Relics and founder of jambands.com, directed the documentary Wetlands Preserved, the story of an activist rock club, which screened at South by Southwest, opened nationally, then aired on the Sundance Channel. He is the creator, writer, and host of Long May They Run podcast. Season 1 was selected as the top pick by the New York Times and reached #1 on the Apple Music charts. He holds a JD from Columbia Law School and a PhD from Harvard's History of American Civilization program. Did I mention how smart he was, by the way, folks? And joining Dean as today's featured guest is Donick Cary. Emmy-winning writer, producer, and director. Donick got his start writing for Late Night with David Letterman. He continued writing for Dave at the Academy Awards and served as both head writer and the guy in the bear suit on The Late Show with David Letterman. After 5 years at Late Night, he moved to The Simpsons, where he served as co-executive producer. Donick has since served in some capacity on New Girl, Silicon Valley, AP Bio, Bored to Death, Just Shoot Me, and Parks and Recreation. In 2004, Donick created the animated series Lil Bush for Amped mobile cell phones. The show was quickly picked up by Comedy Central, becoming the first web series to move to television. To animate the show, he founded Sugar Shack Animation, located in Bulgaria. In 2007, after a rash of teen suicides in his hometown of Nantucket Island, Donick founded Muzak.org, a 501c3 charity that provides musical instruments and classes to underserved youth around the world. 2020 brought the release of Donick's feature directorial debut, Have a Good Trip, Adventures in Psychedelics, which was selected by South by Southwest and debuted on Netflix in May of that year. His new documentary, Hail to the Breadsticks, is a very personal look at his favorite football team, fatherhood, fandom, team mascots, Native America, and racism. It is my pleasure to welcome these two rock stars to our platform. Take it away, boys.
Woo! Thank you, Tom. Great job.
Yeah, thanks. So, Donick, howdy, sir.
I'm doing good. I one caveat before we get started. I'm sitting in a room with my desk on this side of the room. My wife's desk is on the other side. She's currently in the room. So saying the smartest people in the room, I have to give a shout out to her, or else she's going to kill me while I do this interview.
That is fair. Hey, in terms of being like the smartest person in the room, one of the amazing things you've done is you've been able to sort of blend your vocation and your avocation. Because I think there's plenty of people who might just think you're a big time music fan and not know any other side of you. And there's some people who know sort of the, what you do in film and television and so forth. So with that sort of prelude, what I would like to ask you, sir,
Yeah.
I never asked you this, is, so for people who don't know, Donick founded a charity. We'll talk about it maybe at the end called Muzak. But as part of that, you've hosted an event called the Rock and Roll Carnival in your backyard, and you've had Yo La Tengo, Childish Gambino, Jonathan Richman, The Specials, Billy Bragg, et cetera, which is amazing. So I was wondering, like, what was the precipitating factor that put that in your head? And then can you just sort of talk about sort of the learning curve in doing that over the years?
Yeah, it's funny. We do sort of a non-professional concert booking thing that I'm just constantly doing in the backyard. I would say something magical happened to me 20 years ago, 25 years ago, something like, I guess it was 25 years ago. I'd been a fan of Yo La Tengo for a while, and we went and saw them at the Troubadour here in LA. And it was a small enough gig that they were selling their t-shirts afterwards. And I was like, oh my God, there's the band. How cool. And I was a huge fan. And my wife was go talk to them. You want to buy a t-shirt anyway? And I was like, no, I don't want to bug them. And I was like, they literally want you to bug them. They're selling their t-shirt. So I went and talked to them, and we started to talk about stuff. And I realized I was at The Simpsons at the time, and that came up. And then I was like, oh, they're huge fans of The Simpsons. And there was this two-way street that was like, oh, great, they love comedy, I love rock and roll. Now we're sort of on an equal level footing here. And we got to be friends over that. And I realized there's a lot of people in the rock space that also do that. So I could kind of fanboy out using my credentials. When I turned 40, I got hit by a bolt of lightning over this thing that happened where I grew up on Nantucket Island. And again, we could talk a little about Muzak later, but I had reunited a ska punk band from high school for a 40th birthday party. And I had been working on, I'll try to tie all these things together. I was working on a show called Bored to Death at the time, which is on HBO, Jason Schwartzman as a unofficial detective. And part of the writing process of that, we were looking at an ordinary guy trying to do heroic things and finding the heroic things you can do in the ordinary, in your day-to-day. What is heroic? How can you be heroic for someone else? I was starting to be a father at the time. I had a 5-year-old and my wife was about to give birth to my son. And this theme of like, what are heroic things? On my 40th birthday, I realized I could stop drinking. That's going to give me a lot more space to do things. What a cool, easy way to get. So I left that behind and reunited this band and was dealing with teen suicide all at the same time. And I talked to the music teacher, and he said, on the island, and he said, I have 10 kids who want to play guitar and no guitars. And it was a lightning bolt that was like these sort of gifts that come to you at times where you're like, we can get 10 guitars. And it felt so good 6 months later when he sent me a video of 10 kids playing Ramon songs. And I was like, all I did was ask for guitars. And so that started this thing, which was, and he also said, I have 10 more kids if your charity has 10 more guitars. And it was sort of like, done, let's do that. But it's a long way of saying, I realized that I have this platform and this access to people, and then found this need that was out there, and that it actually combined this thing that I love, which is bugging rock stars and then having them come and play shows in your backyard, which also does something wonderful for kids, and kids love it. It was a treat. It works for everybody. People come to the shows and love it. The bands come and get this amazing feedback from kids. It's awesome. So listening for when heroic things, and I'm not saying I'm a hero. I'm just like when lightning bolt hits and you're like, oh, I could do something, run towards those things.
Can I say parenthetically, by the way, Bored to Death, for people who haven't seen it, Ted Danson, Zach Galifianakis, like I think that's an underrated, maybe underappreciated at this point show. I just want to get that out there in the world.
I think I was watching the new Mr. and Mrs. Smith and kind of going like, oh, this is becoming a format, which is they're not real detectives. They're just people. It's the detective case is an excuse to hang out with people. I was like, oh, that's all we were doing with Bored to Death. You know, it was like this get 3 great actors and let them go nuts, you know, but have an excuse to, we have to do a stakeout. And then it's like, okay, what are they going to do on the stakeout? They're going to talk about, you know, life's intensity. Anyway, well,
go ahead. I'm sorry.
So Dean, I know here's the thing with Dean and I think we met at a flannel shirt store. No, we met at, you actually reached out through an agency because you were looking to develop the Wetlands doc into a show. And they thought of me because I love music, and we started talking. We just had a good time talking. We ended up meeting for the first time we met was at the Fare Thee Well tour on the last night. And Dean was like, well, I got stage passes. You should just come up on stage and watch the last show. Now, the Dead world has gotten very good at always having a last show that you have to be at. But at the time, that felt like, this is it. This is it. So it was a magical first meeting. We had a blast and communed over good music and good seats.
Having said that, by the way, though, in terms of, you know, the next last show, the last show, I would say, though, that one in Chicago, and I know we've talked about this, like another show that you and I were both at by the good old Grateful Dead, was we were at, I don't know if it was called Gillette or Foxborough or Schaefer or whatever it was in '87 when the Dead and Dylan were there. But to my mind, like, those Fare Thee Well shows felt like sort of the old school stadium show. There was something to it that really I thought was pretty heavy and sort of, you know, evoked another time.
Yeah,
it does all go back to the Dead, Tom. There's no doubt about that.
I just, only because I was thinking about this recently. We have a movie pitch that we're trying to get Seth Rogen to do, and it's with his company right now called Grateful Dads, and it is 4 guys who went to the show in the 90s. They were supposed to go to a show, and then they missed it because the Dead, you know, stopped. Well, Jerry died, and so now they're one of their friends passes away. They meet at a funeral, and they're like, oh my God, Dead and Co are having their last show. Now we're like, maybe it's at the Sphere in Vegas, but we were thinking it was going to be up in San Francisco. But it's them reuniting and going to a last show. I think what makes that interesting to me, which is, it's just a road trip movie. It's fun, get a bunch of people together. But this idea of that it's your last chance, that it's always your last chance. If you're living each of your days that way and celebrating it, it is kind of like a call to being present and embracing stuff. Anyway, long story short, Dean, what Dead show is the one that you go like, well, it has to be this was the most incredible experience I had, and why?
Wow. That's that's a fair question. I mean, wow.
Easy answer. It's the one that we did together, right? I mean,
well, although, right, and we talked about this with Tom the other day. I would contend this, like, that's maybe a Dead show, but it's not the Grateful Dead, right? The Grateful Dead ended in August, alas, of 1995. There's been amazing things that have happened subsequently, but I'll have this debate with anyone, and they're really, really inspiring, and there's been, you know, just extraordinary music that's ensued, but none of that is the Grateful Dead. Similarly, I'll go up on my soapbox again for a moment. The other thing that I'll always contend is that, because, you know, I work at Relics Magazine, which, you know, was founded in 1974 in many respects just for people to tape to trade Dead shows that they taped as a forum for that. And right now there are only a couple of us, including myself and my publisher, the lovely Peter Shapiro, who actually saw the Grateful Dead with Jerry Garcia. But I still would contend that you don't need to have seen the Dead with the Grateful Dead, you know, with Jerry, or have seen any shows to be as committed a Deadhead as there is out there in the world, because this does come up on occasion. And I'm a firm believer that you could have, you know, you can get on the bus tomorrow and you'll be just as into it, just as committed, just as much of a Deadhead as any other individual out there in the world.
I had a little bit of that at the first Dead & Co show I saw, and it was where John Mayer was wearing like a checkerboard like something he had borrowed from Gwen Stefani. And it was like, is this a ska band? And he's in shorts. And, you know, when the show starts and it's bright light and you're like looking at this and seeing different people and then about 3 songs in, the lights that got dark, and then it's just the music. And you're like, right, it's the music's great. Just go with it. Just go with the music. Anyway, so you very, very adeptly sort of there isn't a one-off for you that you would.
I don't know. I mean, I could tell some of it's like you're personally entwined, like chasing, you know, in the 90s, chasing Branford and then finally seeing Branford at MSG, or chasing a Dark Star because I didn't get to see a Dark Star till finally I was able to on, you know, Bobby's birthday in '89, or the time that our ticket disappeared and we were driving from Massachusetts to Greensboro. Everyone has this kind of story, and how we were able to find one, and we wanted to go down there because Hornsby had missed the Albany shows, and we thought there'd be so much energy with the piano there, and there was. It's an amazing Eyes, and we got to see, you know, Might As Well, which they hadn't played in a while. So there are a lot of things like that that are entwined. I guess the one thing, and by the way, I love that it's a 3/31/91 show, the Greensboro, and I remember thinking it was so amazing, and being there with a friend of mine who were like, well, you know, that I'm selling him on the Eyes as it's happening, and he's like, well, you know, it's not like the Branford Eyes at Nassau. And I'm like, dude, you know, you can't constantly be doing that, right? We have to be looking forward. We can't think about that one with the empty hole in our head where you can hear the sax. So.
For me, it was when suddenly not just Bill Walton, but Larry Bird and Kevin McHale suddenly appeared on the side of a stage at a show. And growing up in Massachusetts in the 80s, being a Celtics fan and seeing those what felt like two very different worlds. You watch the Celtics in your sports bubble and you listen to the Dead in your jam band space, and you listen to the Dead Kennedys over in your punk rock space. It was hard to make all those things blend together. But having the Celtics and the Dead merge at a moment live was this reminder, oh, like, right, it's all connected. It all goes together somehow.
Hey, now you can just listen in, have Walton drop music references while he's calling a Pack game or something. So
yes. You know, and we've all probably everyone in this chat is mentioning the Dead, and we'll move on from the Dead. It's like it's not why we're here exactly, but we've all probably had the experience of like, oh no, I'm behind Walton. God, I'm screwed, right? Let
me just say, me in particular, I'm 5'5" on a good day. So I have been there. There's a whole path behind him when you're out there, especially like on a GA floor and the like. Maybe, you know, I don't know, but he's so awesome. He brings so much energy, you know, and he does his thing with his arms up. Like you can definitely drift off that and get something going on. Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So speaking of music and what you do, so when you started at Letterman, well, can you talk about, you know, how that came to be? But I'm just curious, do you have a memorable Letterman performance, musical performance?
Yeah. So the dream. Look, so I loved watching Letterman. That was definitely like I watched the show. I watched all the bands. This was like the first. It's on NBC. It's on late at night. So all through high school, you'd stay up until, I guess it was 12:30 to 1:30. That seems crazy to me, but you'd stay up and you'd wait till the end to see Bob and Jerry on, or REM's first live performance, or Iggy Pop is there talking to Dave, and it's so weird, but now he's going to play a song. Blondie, whoever it was, you know, and all those bands that was the way you would get hip to new bands. You're like, who's Tom Waits? Oh, this is who Tom Waits is, you know, because they wouldn't play it on the radio out on our little island. So I love the show, love Dave, love the sensibility. I got a gig there as an intern in 1989. This was when I was still at NBC. Part of the fun, so as an intern, you get paid nothing, but part of the fun is, hey, guess who's down there tuning up? Johnny Cash is in. He's going to play some songs tonight. He's doing a sound check. You can kind of sneak into the back of the thing. I ended up being there for about 6 years. I was the writer's assistant. Then I became a writer. We moved to CBS. Suddenly we're in the Ed Sullivan Theater, where the Beatles and Elvis, you know, these biggest televised events in history. We're on that stage. And every day you'd finish rehearsal, and at 4 o'clock, somebody would be there, you know, Parliament Funkadelic or the Beastie Boys or Nirvana or whatever. And you're like, well, I'm not going to miss, I'm going to write my top 10 list jokes, submit them, and then run downstairs and watch 5 songs with Elvis Costello or whatever. So that was magical. As a 20-year-old, you take it for granted that this is just part of the way life works, is that like, yeah, you do your job and then you hang out and watch so-and-so, you know, rock the house. But yeah, it got incredible performances there. Incredible performance. And Paul Shaffer, the other thing that was so fun was, as a comedy writer, you know, music and comedy go hand in hand in a lot of ways. And as a comedy writer, you could think of any jingle or any enhancement or any funny song. The person that you would then have to go see if they could bring it to life is Paul Shaffer, one of the most talented, funny, interesting, world-knowing humans in the world. And you'd literally be down there sitting with Paul, and Paul goes like, all right, what do you want to do? You want to do a Western ballad? Da, 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 da. And you'd sit with him on the bench and he kind of figured it out. I mean, awesome. So lucky. Is that what your question was? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Well, let me just continuing the narrative, right? So then after working for Letterman, you start in scripted, first writing for the cartoons,
Yep.
and then writing for the people, you know, from The Simpsons and onward. I'm curious, you know, can you recall the first time that you were able to bring in or work with a musical artist in that context, where all of a sudden you realized, wow, this is something I had the ability to do that and connect with this particular individual?
Yeah. I mean, at Letterman, it was mostly funny stuff. Like, I remember when the Foo Fighters put out their first album, we were kind of desperate for we would, part of the comedy you would have to provide is we'd have an act 1 and an act 4, and we'd always have to have those pieces. And we didn't have an act 1, and it's like getting to be Showtime, and Dave gets grumpy when he doesn't know what the show is, and it's getting close to Showtime. And we came up with this idea. It's not the proudest idea, but it was called Will You Touch Our Meat or something like that. It was actually pretty like, oh, come on, guys. But the idea was we'd ask all the guests and people on the street if they would go into the deli next door where Rupert G worked, the Hello Deli, and they go in his counter and just pick up a piece of meat, like a salami or some raw cold cuts or whatever. And so one of my first interactions of actually getting a musician to do anything, I think we had Tony Orlando on where I got him to sing a song, but this was like, holy shit, it's Dave Grohl and the Foo Fighters. Guys, here's what we're doing. We're going to ask you, will you touch the meat and the thing? And will you, yeah. And they kind of were like, what is this? We're here to do a rock song, you know, play our new album. And then they paused, and then Grohl was like, hell yeah. I was like, oh, great. That was the first one. You hope what you're pitching anyone is funny and that they actually laugh. And then they're like, I get it. You never want them to feel like you're making fun of them. You want to feel like they're in on the joke and they get it. By the time I got to The Simpsons, it was this, you know, I had the luckiest first 12 years of my career, because it was Letterman and The Simpsons. We were in these bubbles of these shows that go on forever. You could pretty much ask anyone from Paul McCartney to Siegfried and Roy if they'd show up and do a bit, and they're like, we love The Simpsons, we love Letterman. So you had a lot of access. You know, on The Simpsons, we wrote jokes for U2. They came in, they were excited to be at The Simpsons. I was actually, the day that U2 came in, though, I was shipped off to Miami to record something with Dan Marino because he had a small part and somebody had to go down and get the lines from Dan Marino. So I was hanging out with Dan Marino, and basically he lived in Margaritaville, is like he had set up his own little Margaritaville. And everybody was like back hanging out with the Edge and getting pictures, and Bono's asking about trivia and why Lisa did this or that. And so I missed that one. But very soon after, I had written an episode where the town all harvest, Homer accidentally harvests this juice guy's backyard, and it becomes a very trippy green juice that everyone eats, and then the whole town is essentially tripping. And we were really playing with the idea of like, what is Homer? How does he understand what this is? He's not going to go like, oh, I love the dead. He doesn't know. So to him, these old hippies, played by George Carlin and Martin Mull, are like, dude, we're going to freak people out and blow their minds. And they head into town, and Homer's like, I've got just the music. And he pulls out a cassette, and it was Billy Joel's Uptown Girl. He's like, this thing freaks people out every time. So they ride into town. It's a hippie freak out, but they're playing Uptown Girl. and Homer's kind of singing it. Trippy. At the end of the show, stop me in the questions, guys, if this is getting boring. At the end of the show, we were like, hey, we got a chance to have a band cover something. And I asked Yo La Tengo if they're around, and they were like, we'd love it. And they covered the theme, and they did sort of a Tomorrow Never Knows version of the Simpsons theme, which was incredible. And then Dan Castellaneta had added some trippy psych out Uptown Girl. She's been living in this world, which really gave us a new perspective on all of it. So in general, Dean, to answer your question, bands are up for stuff if you can find those little windows in their schedule.
I am reminded, by the way, you mentioned your first time seeing Yo La Tengo just came up again. I remember seeing them. It was either at the Rocket in Providence, or maybe it was called Club Babyhead. It was called something like that. And then after their show, they bring out their tub of T-shirts that they made. Probably the same experience as you. It was just so cool to have them vested like that. And they did want you, like my friends are like kind of were a little too nervous at the time, kind of walk off. I'm like, no. Just like you said, like they kind of want us to go, let's go support the band.
Yeah, I don't know if this is not necessarily an open invitation to bug Yo La Tengo, but I do think they are very engaged and curious who likes their stuff and what they're up to and stuff. I've had so many wonderful experiences. We were just with them actually in Austin last weekend. We used to see them in Hoboken all the time when we lived in New York. That was always you take the bus out, you have this ceremony with them where they do their thing, take the bus back. Anyway, so Dean, why don't I throw one at you? You've taken a few things now back to Hollywood where you're like, this seems like a show. You wrote the Fairly Well book is made to be adapted. The Wetlands is a great setting for a show. Peter's book, I know you've started. Tell me what the process has been for you coming from where you are, because Hollywood is changing rapidly right now and in a lot of ways is broken. What has been positive, negative for you? Does it make you feel like, yeah, I'm going to keep taking swings there? Or is it just like, these idiots?
You know what? It's always fun because you never expect that it's going to happen. And I have to say, right, that I have some interest. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, right? The people don't know him. The biggest silent film comic in the world, signed the first $1 million contract in 1920. And then over Labor Day weekend, they have a party up in San Francisco. This is during Prohibition. There's some bootleg gin, and someone dies. And the accusation is that Arbuckle killed her. And I turned that into, eventually, I found the defense records, found trial transcripts, blah, 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 blah. So I'm always sort of interested in the world to begin with, even though it's certainly not anywhere that I tread. So when people come by and they're like, okay, let's turn, I remember Ticketmasters. Somebody wanted to turn that into like a Mad Men type series because it starts off, it's set in the early 1960s at the beginning of computer culture when that sort of develops. And I'm like, okay, I don't care. Like the thing is, I enjoy just having creative meetings where you get to chuck ideas around. And my spirit certainly isn't broken because number one, it's always fun. And number two, I have no expectation. It'll go where it'll go. But it's cool just to sit around with some bright people and chuck some ideas about it. It's that's always satisfying for me. So there've been a couple things with everything. With the Popper book, same idea. With Peter's book, fingers crossed. We have all these things, and then you see where they go. But for me, it's actually been pretty entertaining. Just doing all that from my perspective.
Yeah. I mean, those all seem like no brainers. The Fatty Arbuckle thing we were talking about a little bit the other day. I'm like, and you were saying it's in your investigation of it, it's actually mostly from the woman's perspective, which seemed like such an interesting lens into fame and the patriarchy, the way Hollywood is, the power structures are set up, and it sounds really interesting. Yeah,
I give this away. I say that, I mean, honestly, the best version of this Arbuckle story, like Arbuckle is almost ancillary to it. It's about women in the 1920s. And that's sort of because Arbuckle, to the extent people care about listening to Arbuckle, right? Arbuckle was almost ancillary. And by the way, the punchline of the story is this. He has 3 trials, 2 hung juries. The third time the jury comes back in 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes, with a statement saying this man never should have been charged with this crime. And at the end of the week, he's banned from film for life by Will Hayes, who's
Right,
taken
right.
over during a time when people are just kind of figuring out, how far can film go? And so that's the starting point. And the reason why the story develops as it does, again, is because of society and culture, and especially the role of women during that time. The woman who passes away, I'll stop on Arbuckle, but the woman who passes away goes up to his room in this hotel by herself. They bring records, which is, verboten during that time. It's a really, really fascinating story.
Well, I would say this, and I'm not sure, I know this is mostly a music crowd listening in. First of all, guys, anyone who's listening, we're here for you. If you have any questions about anything, please just shout. We're happy to talk about anything. But also, there's an interesting thing happening in Hollywood right now. Like I've always said, whatever, this sounds like not I've always said, but the cliche of nobody knows anything is more true than ever. And what we used to not know was, what show is going to be a hit? Why is Seinfeld a hit and something else that we all thought would be a hit, no one watched? It's very unpredictable, right? But now we don't really even know, like, what is the best way to distribute this thing? Who will distribute this thing? Will it get buried on Netflix and never seen, or will it be on Netflix and 500 million people around the world see it? It's almost something you can't gamble on or bet on or predict in any way, But what I do think is true is there's more distribution channels than ever. And for people with a little bit of money who can fund things and want to see things out there, there's more opportunity than ever. And there is back end to make money on that direct to consumer, I think. There's a bunch of models that need to shake out. People have to take some chances. But if there's anybody out there who wants to make stuff, this is a great time to find the stories you want told and seen. And for example, we've got stuff to make if you want to make it. I was gonna say, like, Dean's got so many great ideas and books, and I think I don't know. It's interesting. Like we've been trying. The reason I bring it up, we've been trying to make. We've started this version of making Have a Good Trip too, right? We made this documentary, interviewed 50 celebrities about their psychedelic experiences.
Wait, can you pause on that, Donick? Just one second.
Course.
For people, just don't tell people tell people who's in that. Who's in the film? The initial Have a Good Trip. Because then they'll get
Yeah. So that was a fun journey, if you will. I was having a lunch name drop with Ben Stiller and Fisher Stevens, and we all were sharing psychedelic stories. And I was this little other bolt of lightning that was like, this is 13 years ago now. But they told these really funny stories. I was like, what better way to tell these stories than add some animation? And also asking myself, how come we only can have this conversation in a lunch and you would never let anyone in the public know you ever dabbled in any kind of psychedelics, that would mean you're crazy and whatever. Why is it so stigmatized? These stories actually, what a great way to destigmatize is funny stories. Anyway, we over about 8 years, I shot a bunch of interviews, and we ended up getting access to, certainly our comedy friend base, Sarah Silverman and Nick Kroll, and just funny people that we knew and could reach out to. But then we started to find advocates, people who had good and bad experiences. Sting was one of them. Ad Rock was another. Just the people that like would filter through the system. You go like, wait, Sting will meet us? Great, let's go talk to Sting. And we started to learn a lot more at a time where psychedelics weren't as much a part of the conversation. We got the movie out in 2020. I think having so many celebrities attach and sort of come out of the closet, we immediately hooked up with the people at MAPS. Rick Doblin reached out to us. It was like, holy shit, your movie is what the movement has needed forever, is a bunch of people saying it's okay. And they're still saying, et cetera, et cetera. But we started shooting around too, because we had so much fun with it. We've interviewed everyone from Wiz Khalifa to Melissa Etheridge. Billy Strings has a hilarious story. We talked to him about O'Teal. We spent an afternoon with O'Teal. Mickey has a story for us. We haven't talked to him yet, but Billy was in the first one. So we feel like we got to have a dead drummer in each of these movies. But we found, we've dabbled with this idea. So the first one was on Netflix. It's a little bit of a strange thing where they don't really share a lot of numbers with you, but they do share the first 30 days. And they shared the numbers with us. 40 million people had watched this. And we're like, holy shit, this movie is a huge hit. And then we say, what does that mean? And then there's nothing, that's it. You're like, what does it mean? It means nothing. You're done. You move on. They just keep airing it. So we've been trying to figure out, is there a way to do this now that we have a fan base and some awareness? This second movie is really now about the next 50 years of psychedelics, how they can help. What's a bad shaman? What's a good shaman? What's good indigenous practices? How do we honor that? How do we not honor that? You know, where can this take us or not take us? How do we avoid stigmatization like last time? Safe practices, all that stuff. But we're not sure we want to just sell it to Netflix. We're also going like, is this something that we could do something else with? Can we take it to direct to consumer? Can we build our own magical portal that it airs from? Something like that. We're up for anything. But we do need partners in that, you know, and or we could just sell it to Netflix, which feels like a very old model now. Anyway, just throwing it out there as a fun adventure if anyone wants to get on board.
Carrie Fisher, by the way, in that first one, she holds. I mean, she wins the round to my mind.
So this is one of the most magical projects, funnest projects. We put out a topic and then, you know, we're waited to see who would show up. And I'd have days where I'd get a call and it'd be like, hey, next Tuesday, you got to be at Carrie Fisher's house at noon and then Ozzy Osbourne at 3:30. And I'm like, what's happening? What is this? But yeah, Cary was amazing. Yeah, her house was amazing. It was amazing.
Hey, in terms of the after school special throwback, it's a great. People who haven't seen it, you should see it. I guarantee you'll enjoy it. Plenty of music folks and other people and comedians and actors and the like. Some of it's animated, as you point out, which I'm thinking of Lil Bush, which Lori Geltman. Did you grow up in Holliston, Massachusetts? If you did, I think you grew up around the corner from me. Anywho, but anyhow, so let's talk about Lil Bush. And you have in this Iggy Pop is the one that always, amongst many other individuals, can you talk about like how did you have the vision for him in it, and how did you pursue him, and how that all go down?
I made the rookie move of eating peanuts in an interview. Excuse me. Dean, let me see if my throat clears in a second. What did I?
In the interim, well,
sorry about that.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so Iggy Pop, so Lil Bush. This was one of those things where, again, we're trying to make something outside the normal system. And there was a moment where cell phone companies were suddenly like, we can make content, we can put it on our phones. And this company, Amp Mobile, my God, there's literally a peanut right there.
Have your wife come over and give you the Heimlich.
She left. I'm actually the smartest guy in the room, left standing, and I sucked down a peanut.
So not that smart.
Not that smart.
Yeah.
I know, I get a drink and I finished my water. It's a disaster, guys. I'm sorry. So we made Lil Bush very cheaply for a cell phone company. And I had enlisted my mom to do the voice of Barbara Bush. I was doing the voice of Little Cheney. We had friends doing the other voices, and we had it on cell phones. It was the first thing to go from cell phones or mobile onto the internet. We got 1 million views. This is a while ago, so the internet was still kind of finding that, like, oh, people watch videos on the internet. And I took in the stats that we had from the internet to Comedy Central. Was like, people really like this cartoon. They're like, great, pick it up, let's do it. We love everything about it except the voice of Little Rumsfeld. Now, I was only doing 2 things on the show. I was doing Little Cheney, which all he did was rah, 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 rah. Like, he didn't have to do much, so it wasn't much. But Little Rumsfeld actually had real lines, and I was doing the voice of that, and I was doing my best version of a dumb guy. It wasn't great. They called it out and said, we love everything about the show except this. Whoever's doing the voice of Rumsfeld, we got to change that. And it was one of those like, yeah, I always hated that actor. I'm not a fan either. But it was an opportunity to make lemonade out of lemons. I was like, what if we got, like, I don't know, Iggy Pop? And they're like, great, we love it. So
hey, can I pause you there? Like, yeah. How did Iggy Pop? Like, how did that pop into your head?
I mean, it was sort of like, what would be the biggest, weirdest, magical thing to happen, go for it. Go for it. Who would you be thrilled to have to get on into a session with every month to record their lines? It was just a random. I also thought Iggy had the right gravelly, low, baritone that would be kind of like Rumsfeld. Feels like a little like the gravitas. Now we were shrinking the guys down. They were all 8-year-olds or so. So it was Rumsfeld as an 8-year-old, and it was like, oh, Iggy feels like the right mix of gravitas, goofy, and also there's a little bit of like, we were painting Rumsfeld as a little bit like, yeah, we got to do it, man. We got to do it. I won't get into the politics of Rumsfeld, but that like Iggy kind of represented sort of a punk rock approach to politics would be a fun way to think about Rumsfeld. Anyway, Iggy was like thrilled, and we're like, okay, great. We started recording Iggy. Two things happened that were like highlights of working in show business, which is why you always have to ask, what's your dream casting? Go for it and see if it can happen. One was Iggy liked to record in Miami where he lived, and he preferred if I was there with him. So for a while, I would go down to Miami once a month. He'd pick me up at the airport in his I guess it was a Rolls Royce convertible. He'd often have just jumped in the ocean to wake up. So he'd be driving around, as you would imagine, Iggy Pop without a shirt, bare feet. Donick, let's do it. Let's get in the booth. You'd record. I know it sounds crazy, but that's how it would go. He would tell stories about like working with his gardener and the gardeners drive me crazy. And I was like, well, that's a whole other cartoon. We got to do that. Like Iggy as Curb Your Enthusiasm, Iggy in his downtime. Anyway, and then the other thing that would happen is Iggy would fly out here once in a while if he was on tour or doing something else. And one of the best days, my mom kept doing the voice of Barbara Bush, who was pretty crazy in this series. And one day, Rumsfeld and Barbara had lines together, so we were recording them together. So we had my mom and Iggy Pop in the booth. Iggy takes his shirt off to do the stuff. My mom's like, oh, Iggy, he's so adorable. She's kind of flirting with him. They're laughing. They're having a I was like, we broke show business. This is ridiculous. But it was so fun. Super fun. Anyway, fun time.
Well, since I'm contractually obligated to bring it back to the Grateful Dead whenever I can, Phil Lesh also on that show. Can you talk about working with Phil?
So yes, Iggy opened the floodgates of like, well, who else would we have the joy to have a part here or there? So we ended up having Jeff Tweedy and Frank Black, and Dave Grohl did a voice, and the Chili Peppers. At one point, we were doing an episode about Big Pharma, and we needed a Big Pharma representative. And we were like, well, we got to find somebody who kind of like twists this a little bit, but also has the same kind of Iggy Pop, deep voice, baritone gravitas that you're like, if they're telling you about pills, you're going to believe them. That there's and we took a flyer and threw it out to Phil Lesh, and he was tickled by the part. He thought it was funny and was like, I'd love to do it if you can, I forget what he was rehearsing, but it was some show in New York. He's like, if you can come in and record at this place he loved in New York, he'd love to. And we went and sat with him, and I couldn't help, you're always torn with these things, because you're like, just be cool, have a good time, enjoy what they're enjoying. Again, we'll talk about talent of being a good interviewer, but one of the things is listen to what they're laying down and go with it. I couldn't help but say, Phil, I just got to tell you, I was at the first Dead show, and it was at Saratoga, and it started raining, and you sang Boxer Rain, and it was incredible. And he was like, oh yeah, sure. He kind of went like, yep, I've had these conversations. A minute later, he was way more interested in talking about how do you animate a character? Like, that's crazy. So they just draw it. Like, he was really into that. So still, it was a blast. And he was great. If maybe I'll post some little Bush clips, because like it'd be worth having Phil Lesh's Big Pharma pharmaceutical representative out on the internet at this point. It'd be pretty fun.
I think that's fair. Hey, so kind of getting back to Muzak, which is where we started. So you grew up on Nantucket, right?
Yeah.
And I saw a decent amount of music, at the Muse and Chicken Box on Nantucket when I was, early 20s and the like. So the beauty of having those two venues and the fact that it's Nantucket is you can get underplays, right? You can get people who otherwise wouldn't be playing that size venue to come out to the island. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that growing up or subsequently, some of what you were able to say?
Yeah. So Nantucket's an interesting place because obviously we all have an image of this golden, this sort of what Nantucket has become as a very rarefied, exclusive. There's, everyone's got their yachts out there. And it is for 3 months. It's impossible. It's really expensive, and people will pay not Jimmy Buffett now, but like Jimmy Buffett was playing somebody's birthday at a compound and wherever, and you're like, what's going on? But then, you know, growing up there's 9 months. I've always described it in the 80s for sure. The summer felt like you're in the middle of you were living in a Porky's kind of movie for 3 months, and it was beer and drugs and, you know, kids coming in from all over the East Coast to party, and then they would all go away. And then the winter months to me was always like The Shining, where it would just get weirder and weirder. And by February, March, people were going crazy, and there was nothing. It all shuts down, and it's the working class year-round kids kind of going like, wait, how come there's this other world that seems to happen, and then that takes the party off the coast, and we're left here to hold the fort down until the sun comes out again. So that was very weird, but and very disorienting. And I think finding things like music to get you through the winter and bands. But yes, in the summer, like the only bands that got there, I remember seeing a band called Three Colors, Boston band. It came up recently because we did a show here in the backyard. We were lucky enough to get the Specials to come and play in the backyard. Specials meant a lot to me growing up. They were one of those things that was like, oh, punk that's fun, that's political. It has it all mixed in and amazing. So getting them here, it was Terry Hall's last American show. And about a month after they had played in our backyard, he passed away, got cancer out of the blue. This thing of like it's our last chance. And so we enlisted a year later. We did a night of Terry Hall's music just to celebrate. We all missed him and couldn't believe it. We had the guys from No Doubt, and we had all the people in the Specials bands. We had Fishbone and all these people who loved Terry. But one of the people we enlisted was this guy JG, who was the Mighty Mighty Bosstones keyboardist and kind of band director. And we were practicing for that show, and he was like, oh, I was out on Nantucket. I was in a band called Three Colors. And I was like, my head exploded because Three Colors played at the Chicken Box. Chris Warner on the chat over here is chiming in Three Colors. One Big Tree, was that their song, Chris? But JG was like, I was in that band. And I was like, well, that was the first kind of new wave punky band that I ever saw in Nantucket. And they came out because they were doing the Cape and Boston circuit. Anyway, the Beaver Brown Band was the other one that made it to Nantucket in high school. And that was sort of seemed a little, I was not like a huge fan of that. And I remember we could not find any, can we talk about drugs? We could not find any drugs to go see Beaver Brown Band. So we drank cough syrup literally and went and sat in the back and were like nodding off to Beaver Brown. That was a bad night at the high school. Sorry, guys. I censored.
You know what? I'm going to stand up. It's my home state. So I'm going to, John Cafferty. I'm going to stand up in defense of Beaver Brown. That actually was my first seated like theater show. Was coming off of Eddie and the Cruisers. They played the PPAC, Providence Performing Arts Center, blew out the room in Rhode Island, and I'm going to stand by. I enjoy John Cafferty and the Beaver Brown Band.
They might have been great, and I would say like that was a lesson in like this is not a drug that enhances your experience or makes you more connected with the world. This is something that shuts you down, especially from Beaver Brown. I don't even know what that was. But just on that, Dean, I'll ask you, because we talked a little bit about the movie, and wait, we have Lori played a gig with Three Colors. Amazing. Fun Boston trivia. Just because we were talking a little bit about have a good trip in psychedelics, I know that as relics and in that space, what has been your biggest takeaway from the psychedelic experience and lessons that you apply? I was going to specifically ask to fatherhood.
Oh, wow. That's a lovely question, sir. I mean, to me, and this applies across the board, and it's not just about seeing the Grateful Dead and bands like that, but I grew up in Massachusetts with Laurie Gelman for a while, and then moved to Rhode Island, and lived here for many, many years, and eventually, frankly, came back. But my dad was a big jazz fan. He actually lived in Newport, went to the very first Newport Jazz in '54, and that's something I would always see growing up. Like I saw Miles, I saw Mahavishnu, I saw Wayne Shorter any number of times. So that maybe combined with Grateful Dead and other psychedelic bands. I mean, honestly, you just learn to be egoless. I mean, there could be no bigger, better lesson in life that I apply every single day at Relics, interacting with people, interacting with my kids, interacting with my wife. You know, I don't know. I think if you can take that away and really feel that and have that be, you know, a big part of who you are, that'll get you pretty far. You know, be confident but egoless, and it's pretty fun if you can walk through life, you know, that way. And talking to musicians all the time, but they don't necessarily frame it like that, but they have sort of a similar ethos. A lot of my favorite ones in terms of how they go about things. I remember doing this interview with Trey Anastasio from the Fish. Who doesn't enjoy the Fish? Maybe you do. Maybe you don't. But you know, where he was saying that when he is in a jam, when he's in a live improvisational sequence, that everyone in the room is informing it in some way and making it whatever it's going to be, from the people backstage to the people out selling hot dogs to the people running lights to the audience members. And I do think that that's really at the core of what goes on, the music that inspires me, but also then what I take away from it and try to, on my best day, on my good days, apply it to whatever I'm doing and recognize that. I don't know. I think if everyone could have some sense of that, it's beneficial. And parenthetically, by the way, not somewhat entwined, one might well argue, with psychedelics. It's not part and parcel. It's not requisite to the course. But you know, since you made the film, I think there's something of that.
Yes, the lesson. I think there's something we were talking about. I was going to ask you this question of, like, you know, we were talking about interviewing people and what makes a good interview. And there's sort of two things that we were playing with. Just because we're running out of time, I'll cut to it in a little bit. But one of them is listening, which is, I think, a very good lesson in parenting. It's just like, all right, remember, you're not just going like, here's all the lessons you need to download on them. You're listening to what they're ready to learn. That's where you're going to have the real connection. But also the ability to improv. I think you were saying, as an interviewer, was kind of how you look at an interview. And I love that, because to me, that is what parenting is just like, if you're good at improvising, you're going to go places with your kids and they're going to trust you and want to do that. It's the same as doing improv on stage, making music, comedy, etc. But weigh in on interviewing. Did I frame that right?
Yeah, no, I mean, the idea for me is just preparing to improvise. So that's it. So you absorb everything that you think you might talk to that individual about, and then you let it all go and you go in and let it fly. And then it's a conversation, right? Because you want it to be a conversation, not an interview. Because an interview, they're going to go around, they're going to, you know, whomever it's going to be, like, they will have answered all those questions, right? When they do the tour of the dailies, to the extent there still are daily newspapers out there. And that's something I definitely do not aspire to. I want to have a fun conversation, and that's where you get the best stuff. And I think it's satisfying on both sides. But to do it, I don't go in cold. I do put in a lot of prep work, and then maybe I'll have you know, some outline or some words on a piece of paper, and I'll go from there and respond to it and let it go. But again, and that I come back to, I've heard Trey Anastasio. And by the way, Tom, to answer your question, I think I'm going to check out a little Fish sphere. You know, I'm committed. Because why not? You know, and by the way, and for people who you still can make it out to U2. They close out this weekend. We're
going this weekend. We're going to the Sphere this weekend to U2 Saturday night. We'll be there if anyone's around. Excited to see the Sphere. Never been to a Fish show either, so I don't know what that means, but I did see Trey once. Anyway, that's just a.
Well, 420.
I know, crazy. A lot of dead.
Come on out in April. You know.
But to your point, like, I wrote down all these questions for you. I didn't even get to them yet. Same thing. I got my little notes here. Same dealio. Let me ask you one thing, because I thought this might be a good question. Is what is in all of your preparation for interviews, what is the best question you feel like you had it on paper? Either it was the best question, you're like, I've got a great question for this person, and then you tried it and it was the worst question, or you were happy to see it fly out of the park and be a home run?
That's fair. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you in that I don't necessarily think about it in those terms. Yeah. Because it's not if it works, it was the best, and if it doesn't, it wasn't. The one thing I will say is this, and this is, again, Grateful Dead, contractually obligated, that the first time that I interviewed Bob Weir which was in the late 90s. The one thing that I learned in a conversation, in a conversational interview setting, is to be patient. And at times it was excruciating because I would ask him a question and he would think about the answer. And he would think about it for a long time. And there was a lull, the likes of which, one's impulse is to jump in and think, okay, it's a bad question. Or just, I feel like I can't handle this. I have to do something. But if you waited it out, and I remember just sort of like holding onto my fingers, like, okay, I have faith that this is going to work out. And he would give just amazing answers at that particular moment in his life. And actually, I've interviewed him many, many times since, and it was just this one window of his time where he really would give it a lot of thought. And I got a lot out of those interviews in just being patient. So above all else, I mean, I hear too many interviews, particularly on podcasts and where people just stomp on the interviewee. Like, be patient. You're going to get something good. It should be a conversation. Don't jump to your next question. Just sort of let it flow. So above all else, to me, that is, the most important thing. Can we swing back real quickly to Muzak at the end before we have to leave? Because let's talk.
Absolutely.
So, by the way, you went to Cuba, which is awesome. So is that in any way, shape, or form? Did that remind you in any way of Nantucket, or just totally different?
Well, we started to hit on this theme as we started doing a show in the backyard every year, which would fund these music programs. We started to find music programs all around. I've done some work on Native American reservations and Compton and Appalachia. We started having these programs of music teachers who are essentially doing the same thing, which is trying to find that extra thing they need to make their music program go. Kids asking for whatever it is, starting a band, they need guitars, they need extra hours, they need a room to play in, whatever it is. Every place it's a little different. Some places it's 5 kids who want to start a band. Some it's a school, a school community of 500 kids who need, whatever it is. But there was a theme that started to come up, was whether it was, we have a program in Cuba, one in Haiti, which are literally islands. So there was this connection of like, oh, these kids are sort of stuck in an island the way I felt on Nantucket, where you're kind of trapped. But then we started to realize, like, geez, it feels like this school in Compton that we're working with also feels like an island. These kids have never been to Hollywood. It's a bus ride away, but they're, limited here. And music is the thing that might help them travel, help them at least share their voice, fight through things. Certainly when you're out on the edge of the end of the Pine Ridge, at the end of at the reservation there, you feel like, wow, this is really a corner of the country that is ignored, and you feel like there's just no way out. Music is often a ticket out. It's at least a way to get your voice out, share those frustrations, or let, the heavy metal is very popular on the res, I would say. When you get out there, you're like, oh yeah, shit, they are living Metallica right now, and absolutely, like, fucking go for it, guys. Amazing. We'll get more amps. Let's get some more amps out here. That's a great idea. But yeah, this theme of islands and the teenage years being a little bit of this island where no one knows how you feel. No one knows what it's like to dump a bunch of new chemicals on your maturing self and see what happens. It's a weird experiment that happens to everybody. And for a lot of people, music is a great, it's not for everybody, but yeah, for a lot of people, music is a salvation that way. Yeah.
No, that's fair. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. And I never really answered the question about Nantucket and music, but we do this event here. We're looking to do some more fundraiser kind of things on Nantucket. So anybody who has artists or artist connects that you think would do a show for us, or would want to be a part of this, let me know. We'd love to bring Jeff Tweedy out to Nantucket and do a really unique kind of thing. We'd love to have people here, et cetera. And come to the shows if you can. We're going to do another one in September, probably late September, early October next year. We'll do one in LA. So it's always a good time.
Who doesn't want to see some lovely music in your backyard, sir?
Yeah. And with good food. If you want to get involved, Katie, it's asking, how can we get in touch? Muzak.org is the website, MUSACK. There's contact there. You can reach out. I'm also on socials. You can get me on Instagram. I do check LinkedIn once in a while. It's not that often. Good Trip has a socials. You can follow that. I don't know. What are we plugging? Dean, what are you plugging? you have a paperback coming out.
Yeah, so Peter's book, Music Never Stops. I can't reach it. It just came out in paper not that long ago. Really, really satisfying. Peter Shapiro, just super fun and intentional.
Wonderful read, and now it's not as heavy. You can actually take it with you in it. Yeah. So
that's fair. So I would encourage anyone who hasn't, pick it up. Who knows what'll happen with it? But we were talking earlier. But at a minimum, it's just to hear his take. I mean, and the reason that book came about is I had pitched it on him after I did the Popper book, just knowing how intentional he is with so many things and what his approach is. And it's just been so much fun to work with him on things over the years, going back to wetlands and beyond.
Well, at the very least, Dean, can we get you and Peter to come have a conversation for Muzak on either coast sometime, just for fun, and maybe we'll get Popper or somebody to play some tunes at the end of it. That'd be a fun night.
Yeah, it would be delightful, sir.
Great.
We'll make it happen.
Done. Any other major questions from our webinar guests? I want to make sure we covered everything. Tom, did you get everything you wanted to know?
Oh, Lord, are you kidding me? I want y'all to carry on for 3 more hours. This is fascinating. You're exactly what I thought you would be. Just absolutely incredible. Donick, seriously, there was one question earlier from Mark Sampson. You want to know what are some of your favorite top 10 lists of all time? Is there one that kind of sticks out? And I'd be curious, as a tack on to that, is how did you write those lists? Was that your creative genius at work there?
Well, so the top 10 is I got a couple quick ones about the top 10 factoids. The top 10 is something the whole writing staff writes together. So in the morning, we come up with topics. The head writer, part of their job is to go in with Dave and get a topic approved. He usually would pick what it would be. Sometimes it would be very topical, like right now it would be cases the Supreme Court has decided not to take, and then the writers would all get that assignment. And over the course of the day, by 3 o'clock or so, you'd hand in a list of your 20 ideas for that topic. But every once in a while, you would get Dave to go for something not topical. Maybe it's a slow news cycle, and then you'd go like, what are 20 things that the way the world would change if the dog was president or whatever. And then you're like, well, that's a weird thought exercise. And go back to your office and be writing like a weird, thing. So those were really fun occasionally when you'd get like that kind of weirdness to work on all day. The addition to that we started to do a lot of at CBS was doing kind of like either a video top 10 where there'd be 10 things that you would show, or get 10, I did one at the MTV Movie Awards where I had top 10 artists' complaints about blank. And then I went there and I recorded different people. So you'd have 10 amazing videos of it's Tom Petty, and then it's Weezer, and then it's whoever. I can't remember. Weezer did not participate. I got shut down by Weezer. That was sad. But those were really fun. The one that was one of my favorites to help execute was Casey Kasem's top 10 numbers from 10 to 1. And we got Casey Kasem in, and he literally did all the setups for everyone. Number 10 comes to us from a little girl in Utah who writes, "My mom has always loved this number. I wish you would say this out loud for us. That number is 3. And then number 10 would be 3. And you go like, what is this? This is crazy. Now we're moving up the charts to number 9, where, this one has come out of nowhere. No one saw it coming. Number 7, number 9, number 7. That was the funnest, weirdest, like absurd thing to work on. That was a blast. The other tidbit on top 10s is, and this was my one kind of like, who wrote it? John Gatta wrote earlier that he interviewed John Lydon and had sort of this test of wills to get to an interview with John Lydon. I can only imagine. Dave occasionally would test you, and as the head writer, you were constantly trying to figure out how to get Dave excited about doing the show or getting over the thing that he was nervous about or whatever. And at one point, we had a couple nights where the top 10, no one really liked it. The audience was quiet, and Dave was just really beating me up for like, what's the topic? We got to really blow it out. What's the thing? Can we even do these anymore? Maybe we shouldn't even do it. And I was like, I think he's testing me. I'm going to just go ahead and say, maybe we shouldn't do it. And he's like, maybe we shouldn't. And it was like 2 8-year-olds just going to the wall, like, who's going to crack? And I was like, maybe we shouldn't. And he's like, fine, no top 10. I was like, fine, no top 10. And then it was quiet. And he's like, all right, end of meeting. I was like, end of meeting. We didn't do the top 10 for about 6 weeks. So there was the one time in show's history where it didn't happen. It's like my proudest moment is getting the top 10 taken off the air for 6 weeks because I stood my ground. 6 weeks later, one morning, Gabe was like, you know what we could use tonight? Maybe a top 10. And it was like, this is another test. Do I say, I thought we'd do that? Or I just say, sure. I said, sure. And then we did top 10 and it was just back and we never spoke about it. But that was a weird times.
I love it. I got a question for both of you. What was the very first concert either of you went to? Dean?
Well, I mean, it was probably, I grew up in Rhode Island, like I said. I mean, the first big concert I went to was John Cafferty and the Beaver Brown Band. But before that, there's this club in Rhode Island called Lupo's, which I don't know if you ever made it to at any point, Donick.
I went to the living room. No, I never went to Lupo's.
Lupo's like a bigger version of the living room in certain respects. But there was, it actually was this band that's still around called Max Creek. They would play there occasionally, and we were 16, and we could go there and you could drink. They had happy hour back then before people got rid of happy hour. And so I remember we went in on this happy hour day, got like not scorpion bowls, but they were giant bowls of something or other. And we saw some Max Creek, and maybe Max Creek. I got to give Max Creek its due. Maybe that band sort of put something in its head. And of course, the guitar player Scott Morawski now plays in Mike Gordon's band. So it does come back to Fish and the Light and the Dead.
I would say Max Creek probably made it to Nantucket. That's very familiar. I don't think I saw him though. But my first major concert was at the Worcester Centrum. You would literally call when they go on sale. I think you'd see the announcement in Rolling Stone magazine and then be like, wait in line. I got tickets to see the Kinks at Worcester Centrum when I was probably 13. And that was pretty exciting because I had really, and they were in full rock show mode. I think it was the Give the People What They Want tour. And they were just like, we're going to play the hits, man. And we're going to do a rock show. And we had seats up way in the perfect first rock show.
I think, by the way, parenthetically, real quick, I think that the Kinks, if you're thinking of an arena band from like the 80s that kind of people have, for whatever reason, wrongly forgotten about or doesn't get its due today. To me, the Kinks is the band that always comes to mind. Like people forget they were huge and deservedly so. I don't know what happened there. I think maybe they'll get their biopic and it'll come back around.
I think they're like, there's certain bands where it's like, okay, they're fighting. Let's just give them space until they're ready. Like Daltrey and Townsend, like, I don't know if they love each other, but they've figured out some agreement that they play. And so we're like, great, the Who, we'll go see. But the Kinks, you're like, oh, Dave and Ray, I don't know if we want to get involved. But that would be a dream, by the way. If anyone has a connection to either of them, we'd love to just have them come celebrate them at Muzak sometime. We've done a few events where like Tommy Stinson came and we put together an all-star band for him. And he played a bunch of stuff and was we got Fred Armisen and Moby and Tony Canal to be his backing band. And they ripped through, a whole bunch of stuff. And it was like, those are dream shows. So, yeah, I feel like there's a good question here. Oh, did you have, somebody asked about the Letterman, Jerry teaching Letterman how to play trucking on guitar, which is an amazing cold open. If you haven't seen it, that's on YouTube. I was not involved with that though. That brought a big smile to my face as a teenager when it was on TV. I was like, what? Oh my God, what's happening?
Love it.
Yeah.
What was the first record you bought with your own money?
I think mine's to me is a little embarrassing because it's not very meaningful to me, but I think we had a wonderful record store. A man named Charlie Walters out on Nantucket had a place called Nantucket Sound and later became called Musical. He had great used bins and I would buy lots of used stuff. But the first one I remember saving up for that was like brand new and cost a lot and was a lot of allowance was Billy Joel's Glass Houses. So we sort of have bookends with Billy Joel with getting him playing him on The Simpsons and this, yeah.
Speaking of which, Billy Joel was my first arena show at the Boston Garden, and for Only the Good Die Young. I don't know, anyone out there maybe remembers this on this around. It was probably 84, 85. Christy Brinkley came out and played drums on Only the Good Die Young. They were not married yet. I think they were dating, and he was like, "Hey, honey, you want to come out on you want to come out on stage, and I'll show you what we can do." But it was amazing to me. Mine was probably the Cars, the first Cars album, in terms of the one that I bought.
Awesome.
So,
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
and by the way, Danny Lewis, who's in Government Mule, really, and it's sort of been lost to history for people who happen to be Government Mule fans, had a major role with the Cars before that first album. And I'm putting this out there in the universe, they get to tell that story one day for people who are Cars fans. Really, Danny Lewis just did quite a bit, and a lot of those signature keyboard riffs are his. And then he left the band. That story remains to be told. And one other one, real quick, because we have on the next cover of Relics, we have the Black Crowes, and I remember the Centrum, Donick, what you were talking about. I saw Oasis and the Crows. Like, that's brother on brother action there. And I was interviewing the Robinsons, and they said they would get into fights, and the Gallagher brothers couldn't believe it. Like, it went over the top for them back in the day. So
Amazing. We had a question over here. Carlene was asking about Trey Cool chasing Dave around and scaring Dave. Dave was legitimately scared of most of the guests, mainly because he wanted to protect himself. It's like anything can happen. He wanted to make sure things were controlled. Trey is, we're working on some stuff with Green Day right now, maybe doing some upgrades on their tour for Muzak where you can upgrade your tickets, etc. So keep an eye out for that. We Tim Armstrong from Rancid is on tour with them this year. Tim has been in the backyard a number of times. We've had a couple Operation Ivy reunions here. But Trey showed up last year for the specials and had a blast and was like, I'm coming back. I want to play. So come and hang in the backyard. You may get, if you're a Trey Cool fan, he'll be around.
I can't wait. Well, listen, guys, it is time to wrap this up. I just want to say first, I promised the audience that I had the two smartest guys ever in the room today. I proved them right. Well done. You guys are amazing. Thanks for all the great journalism, Dean. As I said, you're one of my heroes. I read your stuff everywhere. Donick, what a pleasure to get to know you, and I do look forward to seeing you in LA soon. And folks, we will be back here next Thursday, same time. And meanwhile, be nice to one another.
Thanks for having us, Tom. It was awesome.
Be kind. Thanks, Tom. Great to see you, Dean. Thanks, everybody. See you soon.